Hello, everyone. My name is Drew Gardner with the two Mississippi Museums, and I want to welcome everybody to this week's History is Lunch program. We're in our home, the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. We're also streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube, where any of our previous programs are available to watch at any time. For those of you that are interested in starting your journey or maybe even continuing your journey in genealogy, Andrew McNulty, a cultural resource specialist at MDH, will lead a beginner genealogical workshop at 10 a.m. this Saturday, August 16th at the William F. Winter Archives and History Building just next door. This workshop is going to cover the study of genealogy, how to begin personal research, how to find and use open source materials, and how to use resources in the archives. You can register for this event at the MDH events page. If you have any questions, feel free to see me afterwards, and I'll be glad to help you. Next week, we have the pleasure of having Dr. DeAndre Ori and Jean Middleton Hairston join us for their presentation on their latest book, Mississippi Conflict and Change, Then and Now. But today, we are excited to welcome the staff from the Emmett Till Interpretive Center to share Remembering Emmett, the Journey of Truth-Telling. Venita Halbert serves as the Interpretive Center's Community Engagement Coordinator, and she is dedicated to making positive change in her community. She's going to be a little late, but she's going to join us here as soon as she gets here. But we also have Jay Rushing, who is the community organizer and former youth mentor for the William Winter Institute of Racial Reconciliation and currently serves as the center's youth coordinator. Benjamin Saulsberry joined the Emmett Till Interpretive Center in 2016 and currently serves as the Director of Public Engagement and Museum Education. If you've ever been up on a tour, you've probably spent some time with Benjamin at the Tallahatchie County Courthouse. And then at a young age, Miss Daphne Chamberlain first learned of Emmett Till's story and has dedicated much of her career to history and education. As the center's chief program officer, Dr. Chamberlain is committed to preserving and protecting the legacies of Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley while engaging with communities locally and globally. So I'd like to please welcome our friends to the stage from the Emmett Till Interpretive Center.
Good afternoon. I was recently told that when you get to certain digits in life, you have to wear glasses and have several options to see. But first, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Mississippi Department of Archives and History and the two Mississippi Museums, with a special shout out to our friend Drew Gardner for this opportunity for the Emmett Till Interpretive Center staff to be here with you all as we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Lewis Till. This year marks the 70th anniversary of his murder, which had an impact on Mississippi, the South, and the nation. And what we really want you all to take away from today is that the Till story is not just a Mississippi story or a Southern story. It is a human rights story that is very much a part of this nation's complicated historical fabric. And we'll begin this session honoring the courage of his mother, Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley. And we'll go through that in just a second, but I do want to take an opportunity to introduce my colleagues, and they will come as I call them. Ms. Venita Halbert is delayed in making it, but I do want to acknowledge that she will be here. And she's originally from Chicago, Illinois, and she's lived in Tallahatchie County for the past 2 decades. She is a proud graduate of Mississippi Valley State University with a bachelor's degree in business administration. And of course, her highest hope is to bring jobs and also opportunities to Tallahatchie County for all people. And as Drew stated, she is really eager to make a positive impact in her community, and she serves as our community engagement coordinator. She will be here shortly, and you will have an opportunity to engage more with her. Our next colleague is Mr. Jay Rushing, if you would please come to the stage, who is also a Mississippi Delta native. Jay hails from Cleveland, Mississippi, Bolivar County. He's a 2013 graduate of Eastside High School, a former combat engineer in the Mississippi Army National Guard, and a community organizer. If you've seen the work that's been done by Mississippi Votes previously with the 100th birthday of Medgar Wiley Evers, Jay has been crucial to some of the work that they did when he worked with Mississippi Vote, so he knows about groundwork and having boots on ground in local communities. Jay holds a bachelor's degree in history with minors in political science and Africana studies from Mississippi Valley State University. He has served as both a participant and a mentor for the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation Summer Youth Institute, and he serves as our community engagement, our youth engagement coordinator. So let's give Mr. Rushing a round of applause. Now we'll welcome to the stage our Director of Public Engagement and Museum Education, Mr. Benjamin Saulsberry. Ben is a native of West Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, and of course he grew up surrounded by social justice activism, which he credits for his deep care and concern for his community today. Mr. Saulsberry joined the Emmett Till Interpretive Center in 2016 and has spoken on race, racism, and racial reconciliation across the country on behalf of the Emmett Till Interpretive Center. He is a proud graduate of Mississippi Valley State University. You all can see the trend here. And he also attended the University of Mississippi for graduate work in music. If you all saw him this morning, he was on WJTV's Live at 9 speaking about the 70th anniversary. So again, let's welcome Mr. Saulsberry. Now, as stated earlier, this is the 70th anniversary of the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Lewis Till. And as we prepare for the end of this month, August 28th through the 30th, in the Mississippi Delta, but explicitly on the campus of Mississippi Valley State University, we also want to praise and honor the courage of his mother, Mamie Till Mobley. In September of 1955, she gave this statement: "When something happened to the Negroes in the South, I said, that's their business, not mine. Now I know how wrong I was. The murder of my son has shown me that what happens to any of us, anywhere in the world, had better be the business of us all." This discussion today will focus or give attention to the origins of the Emmett Till Interpretive Center, while also giving testimony to the work of ETIC in historical preservation, truth-telling, and racial reconciliation in times like these, in hopes that there is something said here today that inspires you and your community to examine your local histories, preserve and share it with impact and in perpetuity. So thank you all again for having us, and please enjoy the conversation. And I'm going to join the panel until our colleague Venita makes it.
So as Dr. Chamberlain has already stated, this year marks the 70th year since Emmett's unfortunate murder. I think it is very much appropriate to also give thought and reflection to the fact that Emmett's life was not just the murder, or by no means is the value of his life captured in the murder, right? We're talking about a child who lived, a child who played, a child who was loved by family, by his mother and others. And when we think very matter of factly about his visit, the consequential visit in 55, that was with family, right? And so having said that, very briefly, I'll speak to that and fast forward to the work of the pre-interpretive center and everything preceding. So as you probably already know, Emmett makes his arrival into Mississippi, more specifically Delta, Mississippi, I believe on August 21st, about 3 days into his visit. He and others, some of those persons being Wheeler Parker, the late Simeon Wright, I think another relative, I think a gentleman by the name of Maurice Wright, if memory serves me correctly, and last but by no means least, a local for whose name I don't have, is a young lady. They pull up at Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market where the incident or the occurrence takes place. More specifically, Emmett does the infamous wolf whistle to one Carolyn Bryant. Now, when we look at this wolf whistle, and more specifically when we look at Mississippi, 1955, we know that there are a number of other things that had already taken place, right? And so when we think about the environment that Emmett found himself and other folks found themselves in Mississippi and in the South, and to be objective, in the U.S., Quite frankly, what would later take place concerning his kidnapping and murder was really like a boiling point of things that had already happened prior to, right? When we think about Brown versus Board, and more specifically, language given by Justice Thurgood Marshall concerning all deliberate speed, which basically is a way of saying very matter-of-factly that, hey, we can't just say that that separate but equal is unconstitutional. We have to be intentional in actually placing children in spaces where they learn together. As a point of record, not my opinion, Mississippians and others, some of whom said very matter-of-factly that they had a sentiment that showed their opposition to such a sentiment, right? And so you had this almost tangible contestation and fear of what could happen and what change would mean in Mississippi. And so when this child who is visiting family in the summer of '55 on the backdrop of 2 other murders, one of which maybe about 10 days or so prior to his visit, does what some folks would deem the unthinkable, you then have what I think is appropriate, an appropriate description as the unthinkable to happen to this child. And so when we think about the murder of Emmett Till, it's not, the murder of Emmett Till happens, yes, by way of racism, but more specifically by way of fear, right? The fear of change, right? The fear of reckoning with the reality of who and what we are when we allow hate to be a custom, practice, and norm. So the other thing too is there's always silence in so many places. I'm sure that y'all, or I'm sure that for those that are listening, throughout the various platforms, that as sure as we know about Emmett's murder and the bravery of Mrs. Mamie Till and others, there are so many other folks who had been murdered in other places prior to, and no one said a word, or more specifically from a collective standpoint, there was silence, right? And that was the truth for Tallahatchie County. I can tell you as a native, nobody talked about Emmett Till. Nobody talked about Mamie Till Mobley, right? Nobody talked about a gentleman by the name of Clinton Melton who'd be murdered like weeks or months later, in part because in addition to this practice of racism, or not in addition, but as an accompaniment to that, silence was a part of it. And that silence blanketed our community for over 50 years. It wouldn't be till around 2005 where our county and community decided to create an initiative which was spearheaded by the late Jerome G. Little, for whom I thought that it was more than necessary for us as a county and community to not just talk about or not just think about Emmett Till, although those things were important, but we have to put remembrance in action in some kind of way. Now, the thing is, we had no blueprint of any sort and type to go by, right? Easier said than done. And the truth is, even talking about race and racism was so uncomfortable and so contentious in our community. And nonetheless, Mr. Little and others believed it was necessary to take on that task. And I think to their credit, they realized that, if there was an organization or were organizations that could help facilitate conversations and exercises regarding trust building, that would be integral to the success or potential success of that endeavor. And so one such organization was contacted, the William Winters Institute for Racial Reconciliation, which was then headed up by one Susan Glisson, basically helped in the process concerning the building of trust amongst Black and white folks in our community, or more specifically in Tallahatchie County. Now, I want to be crystal clear, or I want to be as clear as I can be. Depending on what crystal you're looking at, it may or may not be clear, so on and so forth. But they recognize the delicacy of this reality. And over the course of about 2 years, a number of exercises and conversations took place in Tallahatchie County. It was done by way of a process known as the welcome table. And so at like the culmination of that process, you had an agreement upon, I'm sorry, let me backtrack very quickly. Another important component to the welcome table process and to the building of this cohort was that it was biracial by design, right? And so with that, there came the concerns of having Black and white folks talking about race, because we know that first of all just wasn't happening from a collective standpoint, and two, we didn't know what would happen if and when it takes place. But around 2007, or the latter part of 2007, even prior to, but definitely around that time, there were certain things that were agreed upon by the collective and other community members. One of which was, when we think about the injustice concerning not just the murder of Emmett Till, but the acquittal of Milam and Bryant, we couldn't ignore the fact that that takes place by way of an all-white, all-male jury deliberating for an hour and 7 minutes. And that takes place because, again, when we look at the environment that all these things happen, it speaks directly to racism, right? It speaks to the fact that at Tallahatchie County, there were no registered African-American voters. And as you already know, you can't serve on a jury if you're not a registered voter. And there were considerable impediments on the process of being able to register to vote in Tallahatchie County, without a doubt, but I'm certain in other places as well. So we wanted to find a way to say very matter-of-factly, by way of text and otherwise, that that we want to do better, even if we don't know exactly what that will entail or what it should entail. We wanted to begin and continue a process of us looking at ourselves, right, and looking at the decisions we made from times past, but then committing this day going forward, to not allow this to happen again, or at least that was an aspiration. Right? And so one of the things that was drawn up was this community resolution / apology, and that apology was read on the courtyard steps of the Tallahatchie County Courthouse in September 2007. So I think we may have a clip of not necessarily the reading of the apology, but definitely the ceremony that was held, for which a reading did take place. And I will say this too before I close my mouth for a little while, is that in addition to, so yes, this was a multi-year process, but during that process, there were two persons in particular that they were able to make contact with and basically have served as consuls throughout the entirety of that. Those two persons being Simeon Wright, or now the late Simeon Wright, and Wheeler Parker. And I think it's extremely important that that's uplifted because, yes, they're noted in history as relatives, but I think it's just as important, if not respectfully more so, that they were witnesses and survivors in their own right, and that to have them as part of this process, I think in some ways speaks to the importance of not giving voice, but allowing the voice that we have to be platformed and shared in a way that it should have been in the first place. Right? It's one thing to say we're sorry. It's one thing to acknowledge, the wrong done, or at least try to. But it's extremely important to do the best we can to not just say it, but actually take courses of action that speaks to recompense. Right? It speaks to, in some ways, repentance, and not saying that from a spiritual standpoint, but just literally from the place of choosing to do different, like taking another position. For so long, the voices of those individuals were not given space and platform. And so when we look at that community where this injustice from a literal standpoint takes place in the courtroom, that cohort believed it was of the utmost importance that we do the best we can to do differently. So with their blessing, those words were crafted and drafted and whatnot, and those words were then read and shared on the courtyard steps with the blessing of those two gentlemen in particular. And Mr. Simeon Wright would go on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm somewhat paraphrasing, but he would go on to say that hearing those words and being in that space was like holding your breath for over 50 years and finally being able to exhale, right? And so, again, by no means did the Emmett Till Memorial Commission believe that was, that fixes the world and now we create this utopic society. But they did believe it was an important first step of so many to come, which would then bring us to, the next portion of our work, which is what are the next steps? What do we do going forward? Having said that, I think this is a pretty good segue to actually kind of hear the words of the late Jerome G. Little and kind of see see him and others in action when we talk about the early days of the commission, which is like the pre-genesis of the Emmett Till Interpretive Center officially.
Wasn't easy. Meeting every month. Traveling all over the country. Trying to bring people together. So we can show the people of Tallahatchie County, show the world that we regret this happening. So this is the occasion. Young people, learn of Emmett Till. And I'm going to close with this. I got a chance to speak to Mrs. Till 4 times since I become the supervisor. I spoke to her when I got elected supervisor. I looked up her number and I called her. And I told her who I was, and I told her about Mr. Banks, that we was the first African Americans to serve as supervisor. I talked to her again when I got to be vice president of the county board. All the time that I talked to her, she never was sad, she never was down. The only impression I got from her that she said, my son was a martyr. His life and his death is going to help others. And I'm always going to take that and going to take it to the grave, that the life and the death that he's lived help me get to where I am.
So that was a video of, you heard Ben speaking about the origins of how the organization came about. Since one of the original goals was to present that formal apology to the family. Since then, we've since pivoted to several different other areas of programming, including youth programming. In youth programming, our goal is really to activate young people, to inspire them to engage with not only the narrative of Emmett Till, but other narratives and other difficult traumas within their communities. And so we do this through various ways. We do this through the Mississippi Delta Film Academy, which is what you'll see here now, where we're bringing a group of young people, most of them throughout the county, but they work with a group of professors from Florida State on how to make documentaries, how to tell short stories, how to put all of that together. They submitted a documentary a couple of years ago in the Oxford Film Festival and won an award. And so they'll through that activity they'll be engaged with those filmmakers, and they'll then turn around and take that experience to their communities. I was 15 years old the first time I ever stood in the courthouse, Sumner Courthouse in 2010. At that time, the courthouse was, purple. It looked completely different from what it did today, and there had been no preservation effort at the courthouse or the store 15 years ago when I first encountered that site as a high school student. Since then, the space has changed, and we've been able to activate young people in that space through different programs like the Film Academy and the Curriculum Project. The Curriculum Project was one of those projects where we brought in a group of 21 young people throughout the state of Mississippi, public schools, private schools. They came in, worked with a group called Facing History and Ourselves, and they created a national Emmett Till curriculum that's being used in classrooms today. The goal of it was to make sure that those young people understood that they have a responsibility in being stewards of history. It's up to each of us to make sure that young people have the equipment and the memory, the equipment and the skills necessary to carry the memories for us. They are like those, our sacred stories, our histories, our experiences are theirs to carry on. We've lived them, we've been there, but if we don't equip them or ready them to be able to carry those narratives, they will die. They'll be easily buried. Being talked about the silence that happened in the community for 50 years from the time Emmett Till was murdered in 55 until well into the 2000s, when there was a complete silence about what had happened in that community. We listened to Mr. Jerome talk about young people learn about Emmett Till. I went to Chicago for Emmett's 80th birthday. Well, we went to Chicago for Emmett's 80th birthday, and I had a chance to have a one-on-one conversation with the widow of Simeon Wright. And she looked at me and she said she wanted every young person to know the story of Emmett Till. And she thinks that those young people knowing the story of Emmett Till will then turn around and activate them. It'll turn around and produce more positive products, more positive members of society. Those young people, within the one Emmett Till narrative, there's narratives of hope, narratives of courage. There's narratives of perseverance. I mean, we even have civic lessons being talked about how, in order to be registered to vote, in order to be on a jury, you had to be registered to vote. When we talk about why the jury makeup was the way it was, from 1955 until 1994, the West Tallahatchie, the county in which the courtroom sits, had not elected an African American member to their board. It wasn't until despite being majority African American, it was not until 1994 when they elected their first African American who went on to become the first African American board president, Mr. Jerome G. Little. And so when we engage with the Emmett Till narrative with young people, the goal of it is to make sure that when they're looking at that narrative, they don't just see trauma, they don't just see tragedy, they don't just see fear, that they see hope, they see courage, that they see see their role in making sure that there's not only a better tomorrow, but that there's a tomorrow where Emmett Till wouldn't die again. And so our goal is to make sure that is to continue to use the space, to use the narrative, to activate those young people, and to make sure that they take those stories and begin to tell the stories of their community.
If I can add just one other little tidbit. Not to what Mr. Rush. Well, I guess in some ways it is a contribution to what he said, but I guess it's to what's been said to date or currently. So our organization deals with a few different, I guess, tenets of programming. So one of which is historic preservation, and depending on how you define and or interpret that, it kind of encompasses a lot of the programs and projects we've done since our inception. Now, prior to Mr. Rushing coming on board, youth has been an emphasis we've had, and we've been trying to figure out the best ways to engage and inform and encourage and all the the things, right? Before the Filmmakers Academy came about, there was a photo documentary workshop that would be held in the summer for which youth would participate and be a part of. They also participated in like a 6-week fellowship program where, in addition to I'm having a moment. In addition to participating in the photo documentary workshop, they would learn and discuss and share with us thoughts on a number of different, at that time, contemporary issues that compared to some of the things from times past, right? So whether it was conversations and or thoughts regarding, imagery that was imagery that was part of the public conversation. There was a painting that came about, I want to say 2016 or 17, where we kind of shared this. It was an image of Emmett that was painted. We kind of had some time where we allowed young folks to look at and decipher and interpret what they thought about that and what it meant to them, what it means to be 14 or a teenager in Mississippi and the like, right? That was a part of the program, even prior to Mr. Rushing's coming in and enhancing what was there. I touched on historic preservation in large part because I think there is a somewhat traditional way that we view historic preservation, which in a very respectful and I'm going to say ignorant way on my part deals with the buildings, right? When we think about the stories, we think about the places and or institutions that these stories happen. And so one of which, and by no means are we saying that this building is more important than others or other spaces, because by no means it is. But the courthouse, the Tallahatchie County Courthouse and Courtroom was one of the few spaces that was still standing and yet was in dilapidation when we think about the historical precedence of this location. One of the hopes that Mr. Little and others had, even prior to the creation of an interpretive center, but definitely afterwards, was the designation of a national park site, ideally in Delta, Mississippi, and our fingers were crossed that maybe somewhere in Tallahatchie County. And so from really officially, I want to say maybe around 2016-ish or so, our organization worked to encourage the probability or increase the probability of such a thing being a reality, though that reality being taking place July 25th of 2023, where then President Joseph Biden puts in place the Antiquities Act, creating the Emmett Till Mobley National Monument. And that monument consists of 4 sites. One of those sites being the Tallahatchie County Courthouse, the other being the building that is still formerly known as the Emmett Till Interpretive Center. A third site being the Graball Landing, which is an approximation of where Emmett's body was recovered August 31st, 1955. And last, but by no means least, an easement on Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ in Chicago. So again, I want to be careful with how I say historic preservation, because I know that there are those that have a very clear-cut idea, definition, and practice when those terms are used, and we're sensitive to that. But as a programs team, we kind of look at historic preservation from a number of different channels and avenues, right? So like whether it's the sharing of stories, right, the dissemination of knowledge and exchange, right, that too is historic preservation. Because sometimes, quite honestly, there is no access or there isn't access to a building or an institution, and yet the story still lives in the heart and words and thoughts of those that are sharing and or have experienced or endured some of those stories. And so we wanted to do, like Mr. Rushing touched on, was find and create as many mediums and spaces as possible that allow young folk and the young at heart to share their story and tell their story in a space where prior to 2005, there was no collective means or ways of doing so. You finna say something?
And now, speaking like what, just piggybacking off of what Ben was speaking about a moment ago about preservation, the different means and ways by which we do it, and who it is that preserves spaces, right? One of the things about preserving spaces is who preserves it and who decides what spaces need to be preserved. And so one of the things that we've done is we've formed a youth advisory council where we engage young people with all of our work, right? They really do inform how it is that the organization engages young people, how it is they have a voice or a seat at the table about how it is that the organization goes about in the sites that we're working on preserving now, how it is that it is that we show up in those spaces. But also, it's important to have those young people at the table, because this now says that you're capable of being here and handling not only these histories, but handling the responsibilities of giving an input and carrying on those histories.
So you all, they are full of a wealth of knowledge on the Emmett Till Interpretive Center. And we are so glad to be joined by our colleague, Venita Halbert, who I'll call up in just a moment. But I think one of the things I do want to pause and also recognize some of our partners here in the audience, because when you think about historic preservation in whatever form it takes place in your own communities, there are spaces, cultural institutions like the two Mississippi museums that is capturing this history for everybody who lives here in the state of Mississippi, but also around the country and around the world, because this is an award-winning facility here that we have, especially that captures the history of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. But when you think about the Mississippi Humanities Council and their Mississippi Freedom Trail Marker project, that is another opportunity. Whether you have landmarks or no marks in your community, there is still valuable history that needs to be preserved and shared in perpetuity. So I just want to give a shout out to Stuart Rockoff and John Spann here in the audience, and we appreciate you all for the support you've given through the years. But there are a number of ways in which you can preserve your own histories, whether it's around the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent. But just so we can lift up those ways, because there are applications that might be forthcoming, and you all can also ask those questions of them. Before I exit the stage and transition, Venita, would you like to come up? This year, of course, is the 70th anniversary, and we have a number of events planned on the campus of Mississippi Valley State University. And as you heard earlier, these are 3 proud Valley alumni, and they were staunch advocates to have the event not just at an HBCU, but at their HBCU in the Mississippi Delta. So we are extremely grateful to Mississippi Valley State and their administrations, faculty, staff, and students for welcoming us to their campus. But you all have materials in your seats that outline the events that will be taking place August 28th through the 30th. Not just at Valley, but also in Drew, Mississippi at the barn where the murder took place. And of course, if you would like other information in order to take information materials back to your own institutions, feel free to see us afterwards and we can provide you with that. And you can also get registered with this QR code or over here to the side. But at this point, I will turn it over to Venita to share from another perspective of our program's community engagement and what's been some of the successes and challenges that you've experienced in this work.
Hello, everyone. Thank you guys for welcoming me in this space. I apologize for my tardiness also, but some of the benefits that I've seen from this work, I love to see the joy in the kids' faces. I love to see them draw the conclusions to certain things. The challenges that I realized when I first started this work was, and I want to pass this over to Jay, I learned this from him. A lot of people was doing this work in silos. We weren't working together. And that's been one of my goals, breaking those silos down, creating partnerships. When you create those partnerships, Susan Glisson introduced me to this term, the snowflake effect. When you spread your wings, you're spreading it through different aspects that's doing other work, but you're all coordinating together. So when you can spread the work that way, it makes it easier for us to get the word out or get the story out or get the truth out, get the work done with partnerships. So that's been my strong suit with breaking those silos and building partnerships.
So, and like, my bad being, but yeah, like I think that is work. Like when you're speaking about silos and the importance of working together, I think that like that's some of the reason that we've had some success. So had some successes, or it's been really one of the strengths of our work. Working with this team is being able to, as you were saying about the snowflake effect, overly saturating area with information, right? If you can get information to the young people and the parents, when you have a team that's covering every sector of community, that is community, right? That is community. You are working to address every aspect of the community, but also not only working to address it, but empowering them with skills. Storytelling skills are extremely important, right? To be able to, that's one of, we talked about Wheeler Parker and Simeon Wright, and Wheeler Parker rode the train to Mississippi with Emmett in 55. Simeon Wright was in the bed with Emmett in 55 when he was kidnapped. They're both cousins. And for years, neither one of them had the opportunity to tell their own stories. Their stories was told for them. And so our goal is to make sure that we equip young people with skills and resources necessary to not, so no one else writes your story. You tell your own story. Right, you go back into those communities and tell the stories of your community. When young people tell those community stories, it helps every aspect of the community. So to be able to work in partnership with Venita and just really like, because when we think about John Lewis, right, when we think about those people that were activated in the name of Emmett Till, those people that were activated after the death of Emmett Till and after the acquittal of the Milam and Bryant, when we think about them, they were parts of community, right? But they were also parts of community that returned to community and activated other young people to come out. And there were young people activated in the name that said, hey, it's our responsibility now because it's not enough alone to remember.
If I can add one other thing, and this is really a culmination of what Ms. Halbert and Mr. Rushing have shared. To the credit of also to Supervisor Little, and so many others, a considerable amount of this work, although it doesn't always get amplified this way, it definitely has its roots and foundations in organizing, right? So Mr. Rushing earlier touched on Mr. Little being one of the first, if not really like the first African-American, well, he and Mr. Bobby Banks were the first African-Americans to be elected as supervisors in the county in the early 90s, like 94. Well, yes, that is true. Now, when you look at some of those details, they had to sue the county, right? And they had to sue the county because for whatever reason, well, for reasons I'm sure most of us are aware, the county wouldn't certify the election results, right? Which is somewhat reminiscent of times of 55 and prior to and a little after, right? Also reminiscent of 55 and times later and whatnot is the amount of the support, the organized strategic support that showed itself in the early 90s in Tallahatchie County when it comes to supporting these African Americans who had, one, been elected by their constituent base, and two, that constituent base was being ignored and disenfranchised. And so thankfully, with the help of other stakeholders in community, and when I say community, I mean the local community of Tallahatchie County, but then also those that were just believers in equity, believers in justice, and had different modalities to make that a reality. Those two gentlemen would then be able to serve in their respective and elected stations. And so when we look at history, without politicizing anything, the fact of the matter is, thinking about Emmett's life and thinking about Mrs. Mamie Till, right, and thinking about the bravery of folks like Dr. T.R.M. Howard of Mount Valley, Mississippi, and otherwise, organizing has been a part of the story, or not a part of it. It is part of the story, right? And it's an integral part of the story because it's through organizing and it's through the building of community and the engagement of community that you then see progress, right? Measurable, and I'm going to be biased when I say this word, meaningful, lasting progress, whether it's through like a formal institution and or it becomes a custom and practice of locales and people, right? So Tallahatchie County, to its credit, and I can say this as a native, and also being able to acknowledge that there are other things for which we got to work on. community engagement is not, yes, it is a part of programming, and thank God we have Ms. Halbert to help build and sustain and affirm those relationships within community, be it schools and some of the other organizations that do the good work they do that is not directly tied to some of the stuff we do, but it's still very much a point of identity for our community. But it's also looking at the fact that it takes all of us, or at least all of us that have a mind and a heart, to work together to figure out what better looks like and what it can and should look like over time. So having said that, we're mindful of the time. Did anybody else want to add anything before we do?
Speaking, I just wanted to uplift. You were talking about, we talked about silence, and I don't know. I think Venita was here at the moment, but speaking about, we were having a conversation about silence and erasure and stewardships of history and sites, and you just spoke about how it is that we, the different ways we carry and different ways we show up to do that work, and like thinking about how it is that you've now made the barn something that was, or through your programming, like something that was once erased from the history, now have made it something that is more of a community asset. Like it's a public programming of remembering, and it's something now that the community is really invested in and involved in. And so to see, we've had young people out of the site, but to see the way that the community responds to the ceremony that's yearly, and I think it's on the schedule again. It is on the schedule. And so to see for the fourth year, I think to see that the way that you've put on that program and how community has responded to this place where such dark history did occur, but the way in which the programming is organized and the way in which you connect with, bring in community partners, makes it much easier of a site to be in community.
Jay, I'm glad you brought that up. And that was the main focus of when we first began planning the memorial services. It was to make sure that we had a day in the community to honor Emmett. Being that this story was in silence for 50 years, how can we stop doing that? How can we break that curse? And once I was presented with the opportunity to do something in honor of Emmett, why not be in the spaces that our community have right in our backyards? And like you said, it's a hard space. It's a very hard space. So how do we want to move forward using this space? If we're going to preserve this space, how do we have our community members come in and speak of the trauma that Mamie has had? A lot of times that we look over that stuff, but a lot of our kids right now face these same kind of traumas. So if we have spaces in our community that allow us to go, it makes it easier. And we're all in the same position, so we're all fighting the same fight. So to have a common location, that was everything for me.
And that's what I was really wondering, was like that reimagined utility, having a space where such tragic trauma did happen, such a tragedy did occur, but to now be able to use this as a focal point of community organizing and development.
And before we go officially into Q&A, that has also been like an ongoing effort of the Interpretive Center. Like I spoke to earlier, when we think about the courtroom and the courthouse, not even just philosophically, but like literally, it was a space where injustice took place, more specifically in 55, and we think about the acquittal of Milam and Bryan and everything relating to why that happened the way it did. Well, we believe, and we try to show that belief in practice, that yes, this is objective, measurable truth, right? Or this is a point of record, right? Regardless of where we stand on things philosophically. How do we, or what ways can we, in light of that truth, or in light of those truths, those that are clearly embraced and established and those that are yet to be discovered, what can we do as a community and as an organization? What can we do to, increase the probability of folks coming into those spaces and learning, again, objectively what they are, where they are, the history concerning it. But then how do we as stewards of this story or parts of the story, how do we find ways to reimagine the utility of those spaces? by no means did we, when we think about the courthouse, say, well, you know, and I'm going to use a hyperbolic example. By no means did we say, well, sheesh, we need to clean this space up and turn it into a bouncy house, right? Because, I mean, and no disrespect to bouncy houses, but when we think about history, we're talking about people, right? And we're talking about the experience of people, times past and present. And it's extreme, at least we believe it's extremely important to acknowledge those things, but also give space to the term that Mr. Rushing has used, and I'm going to use again, reimagined utility. In what ways can we preserve the spaces, the stories, the institutions, and respectfully, those that have lived and endured and survived? Like, how do we bring those, you know, how do we bring all of that into these spaces that are challenging, right? That are hard, that for a long time have not been embraced and or uplifted in a way that actually looks at it objectively, but then navigate processes that speaks to reimagined utility, right? That speaks to the hosting and holding of different points of programming and projects that doesn't ignore the history, but also chooses to kind of lean in on the history as a way and means of moving forward, not moving on, but moving forward together. Those are things that our organization and members within our community, Tallahatchie County and otherwise, have been trying to do, and we're still trying to figure that out even today. So I think this is I mean, it's up to y'all, of course, but I think this is a pretty good segue into Q&A. Be there any questions?
We've got some questions already, Benjamin. All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you know what the status is on purchasing the barn from Jeff Andrews? I read the book, and reading the book, I thought that it had already been completed and closed, but I understand now that's not been closed.
You going to me? Oh, I thought you would raise your mic. Yeah, so I'm not quite aware of the status. I mean, other than what has been shared already. I mean, I know that there was a point in time where, you know, we were looking at possibly acquiring that space. To my knowledge, that's still the case.
Thank you. Normally, I get up and quite often I come to this History's Lunch program, and normally I ask questions. Today, this is not so much of a question, this is more a compliment. I, myself, am used to be in the faculty at Mississippi Valley State University. I worked there for well over 25 years, up until recently. And I want to say how very pleased I am. I really am impressed. I don't think, from my experiences at Valley, I don't think I ever taught any of you. I left there a few years ago. Perhaps you were not there. But I am very pleased. I feel so proud and I've taught young people history for years and years. And it's very pleasing to listen to young people engage in a project of historical proportions that will benefit so many of us. And I just want to say thank you for the brilliant project that you're engaging in. And I hope much success as you continue this project. Thank you so much. It's very pleasing to hear from you.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious of when you started on your project and even when you ended with the courthouse and other important places, how did you get kids involved with the silence that was going on? Because a lot of times we have people that step out there like you, and then you have an event and you got 5 people. So I'm curious, did you go to the churches? Did you go to the schools? What did you do to get these kids motivated to tell the story and to get their parents' support?
So I can speak to the earlier parts, and then my colleagues can kind of touch on, can share their experience as well. So I came on board in like 2016. At that time, there had been programming that involved youth primarily in the summertime. So a lot of it was like word of mouth, at least as far as like the official interpretive center. Now, there were some things that had taken place prior as far as a call for the preservation of that space or the restoration of that space. But over time, the call for youth and others kind of evolved from some of the programming that we had. So the first set of programming, or the earliest youth-based programming, was really more centered around the summertime. Now, the other thing is, I'll say this, really since the opening of the center, and more specifically, at least since I've been there, there's been a consistent interest and inquiry for that space when we talk about Emmett Till, and respectfully, sites relating to Emmett's visit. Now, a lot of it wasn't exclusively youth-centered, but there have been folk, be they from church, be they from other institutions, that I think already existed an interest or desire to learn more about the story and find those spaces, and actually, kind of step foot in those spaces. And that inquiry has kind of expanded over the last, like 8 or 9 years. But a much more direct approach, a much more strategic approach to youth involvement and engagement, has taken place really since, more specifically since Mr. Rushing has come on board, who kind of speak more so to that, as well as Ms. Halbert.
So one of the things is really important to have a relationship with educators. So with the very first program very first project that I headed up as the youth engagement coordinator was the curriculum project. With that project, we had 2 educators as education fellows, and both of them were teachers. And so I worked with, did partnerships with the districts, reached out and to other youth-facing organizations in the Delta or in the area, because this was a statewide project. So Summer Youth Institute, which was a program through the Alluvial Collective, the former Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation, they had a program where, and I was a part of the first program, and I had been a mentor. I had returned twice as a mentor for the program, and so they had a program where during the summer, they would engage young people. They would bring them together and engage them in narrative through civil rights sites. So we would go to Philadelphia, where the 3 civil rights leaders were murdered. We would go to the courthouse. We would go to Fannie Lou Hamer's statue, the Medgar Evers home, different areas around the state, and discuss the events that had occurred there. That experience really did open my eyes to the history around the state, and so I approach my engagement with young people through an experience not focusing on the trauma of what had happened or the grotesque nature of it, because as Ben was saying, and I think Venita earlier too, is like if you sit down and have a conversation with a young person now, what we'll realize is they experience like that level of grief on a daily, right? Like they encounter death, trauma, like they encounter those aspects in almost every aspect of their daily lives now. It's a normal, and so we lean in on the aspects of hope and courage within those. The courage that it took Mamie Till to come here and to sit in that courtroom despite death threats after losing her only son. The courage that it took Mamie Moses Wright to sit on the stage and point the finger at the accuser. The courage that it took 18-year-old Willie Reed to come and testify to give truth. To give truth to the account of what he had witnessed and where Emmett Till was actually murdered. And Willie Reed was 18, and so Willie Reed, one of the witnesses, was only 18. When John Lewis was beat on the Edmonds Pettus Bridge, John Lewis was, I think, 17, or he was like 18, 19 then. Yeah, it may have been 17. And so helping them to really see that young people have always had a place in tomorrow. Young people have always been the thread by which this nation gauges how far we're willing to go always ends with young people. If we think about the Children's March in Birmingham, it was the Children's March that got us the Civil Rights Act, right? Young people have always had a place in activation. They've always possessed the capacity. So it's not about us really instilling it in them. It's about us acknowledging it and awakening it in them.
I can speak from my own experience. Before the courthouse was refurbished and before like any of the big work was done, I was a part of one of the first exchange programs. Jerome and a few of his cohorts, including my Aunt Jessie, and I bring her name up because she was one of Jerome's right-hand men, and she's still doing the work right now beside us. She made sure I was a part of all of that work. During that time, I did not see the use of it. I did not want to be a part. But once the information was provided to me and I realized all of this stuff is happening right in my backyard, it began to click for me. Like I was saying, that's the best part when engaging with the youth. You see those points begin to click for them. You see them begin to draw conclusions that make sense. And that's where I was drawn in as a 13, 14-year-old kid. I've vaguely been a part of the process since then, and now to say 20 years later is a job provided for me, where I'm working and bringing back resources, I'm bringing back information, I'm empowering the youth that's coming behind me in my own community. It's like full circle for me. So that's how I was engaged.
I think you've actually answered half my question, because since you first said, Mr. Rushing first said about stories of trauma being stories of hope, it's easy for me to see how this story is. But all of the buried trauma stories of Mississippi that nobody wants to talk about, that people's grandparents know, is it important to talk that through and make those stories of hope, and how can that happen?
So I think that even buried stories are still stories of hope. The act of unburying and pulling the dirt off of those stories in itself is an act of courage. But also, within every tragedy, I think there is stories of perseverance and triumph, whether that's within that community or collectively as a people. I think that it's important that we evaluate and begin to tell a truthful account. And so unburying those stories. Emmett's story was buried for 50 years because the community had a fear of the division or whatever may happen if the community talked about it. But we're only sitting here now because of the fact that there were some courageous people willing to uncover those stories and to find the stories of hope. The stories of hope for Emmett, my bad, Ben. The stories of hope for Emmett weren't always immediately clear. But when you read through, when you begin examining, you say, hey, that took courage. So we begin to put names to the actual action and call it for what it was, courageous acts.
If I can add one other quick thing to that is, I want to be clear that we had assistance with how, not only just how we shared space when telling these stories or kind of, I want to be careful about saying enduring these stories, but the fact is, at some point there stands a chance that folks will be triggered. So you want to do the best you can to put things in place that can acknowledge the trigger and give you ways to work through that. But ultimately, I don't think we can afford to ignore truth. I don't think this state or this society can afford not to take the time to look at and or examine and work through the truths that speak to the human experience, because it sure is, yes, it is traumatic, and yes, it is tragic and painful. The willingness and the necessary strategies that need to be put in place to allow you to navigate that stuff it increase the probability of you and others, be a community, be a society, so forth, to actually be able to be empowered through the unburying and sharing of that story. Not to be done haphazardly, not to be done for, in my opinion, for profit, but to be done because, again, it's part of the human experience, and I think we stand good reason to be better when we choose to unearth with respect and integrity and due diligence the stories and the potential triggers of doing so, because I think that speaks to our potential and betterment. And I think that brings us to time.
We're going to do one more. We got one more question, Ben.
Sounds good.
Hi. You mentioned the creation of the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument. In my experience, there are something like 430 to 450 different management models of national monuments and parks and so forth.
And my question is, because I do see a Park Service arrowhead up on the picture, what does being a national monument mean for you folks? Does it bring money? Does it bring staff? Are there cooperative agreements? Are there partnerships that you're benefiting from? I realize it's a big question, but I'm just curious about that.
So I want to first say we are not park employees. We are not employees of the National Park Service. Our organization is a philanthropic partner to the park. We're a friends group. Having said that, I think there exists a hope and a desire to see some of those potential positives down the road. And so the role that we play is basically is in great support to the park. We believe that, when we look at the fact that Mrs. Mamie Till, during and after 55, basically wrote the president and the director of the FBI, to be far more engaged and far more supportive for justice, it basically went nowhere. And so to have a park designated in memory, not just in memory and legacy of Emmett and Mamie Till, but for perpetuity, to objectively and truthfully and accurately share this story is like a full circle moment for our community. There was considerable community buy-in, and when I say that, I mean in Tallahatchie County, but also in some of our neighboring counties and locations that spoke to the importance of basically having the National Park Service, or having basically a branch of the government to with fidelity tell the truth concerning this part of this ever-increasing, ever-growing American narrative, that this is as much a part of America as the Grand Canyon and other things. So we and others believe it was extremely important to, if at all possible, have a park designated concerning the life and legacy of Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley. So our organization serves basically as, like I said, as philanthropic partners, specifically through interpretive assistance. But I think there is a hope that, our hopes are that, that the parks do well wherever they are, especially the one that is located in our location or in Sumner and otherwise. But as far as what the actual other stuff, some of those other details, I'm not a part of that process, so I can't really speak too much to that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give our friends from the Emmett Till Interpretive Center another round of applause. If you did not have one of these brochures on your seat or your table, please come over to the table just over here to my right and come grab one. There's some incredible opportunities at the end of the month as we mark the 70th anniversary of the life of Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley. So I highly recommend stopping by to grab it. You'll also notice on the back it has a little bit of information about Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley, Let the World See, the traveling exhibition. It was here a couple of years ago. It's a phenomenal exhibition that's specifically geared to helping children process and work through this story. And so if you have grandkids, children, or just kids in the neighborhood, I highly recommend, if you make a trip up to the Delta at the end of this month, you make a chance to go see that exhibition. Well, one more time, let's give a round of applause for Jay Rushing, Benjamin Saulsberry, and Venita Halbert. Thank you, guys.